I'll never forget the look on my kids' faces the day they found out about my bank account. You'd think I had told them I was hiding a second family or something scandalous. But no, it was just money. My money. The money I had quietly tucked away over decades while they were too busy living their own lives to ever ask how I was managing. The story really starts long before that moment, back when I was a young mother scraping together every dime just to keep the lights on. My husband, God rest his soul, wasn't exactly a saver. If he had $10 in his pocket, he spent 12. And I learned quick that if I wanted any kind of security, I'd have to create it myself. So I opened an account in my own name, a secret one, and every time I managed to stretch the grocery money, or found $1 in the laundry, or worked an extra shift cleaning houses, I'd slide a little bit in there. Nobody knew. Not my husband, not my kids. It was my private safety net, and over the years, it grew into something real. By the time I hit my late 70s, that little account had blossomed into a small fortune. The kind of money that could change a family's future. But here's the thing they didn't know, and I wasn't about to tell them. Not with the way they treated me. See, once I hit 80, my kids and even some of my grandkids looked at me like I was a burden instead of the woman who had carried them, fed them, and sacrificed for them. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, I'd hear the whispers, maybe it's time she moved into assisted living. She doesn't need that big house anymore. We'll have to figure out her finances sooner or later. They thought I was frail, powerless, and broke. I played into it, too, shuffling a little slower, nodding along like I didn't hear their plans. What they didn't realize was that I had more control than any of them suspected. The day they finally confronted me about selling my house, their voices dripping with fake concern, was the day I decided to let my secret out on my terms. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: the sweetest revenge isn't loud, it's quiet. It's the moment when people who underestimated you finally see just how wrong they were. And that's exactly what I gave them. Asterisk, the first real crack in the family facade came on a Sunday afternoon. My daughter Lisa showed up with a folder full of brochures from retirement homes. She sat me down at the kitchen table, smiling too brightly, and slid them across to me like she was presenting a gift. "Mom, you'd be so much happier here," she said, her voice sugary but her eyes sharp. "No more stress about bills, no more worrying about the house. Everything would be taken care of." I flipped through the glossy pages, pretending to look interested, but inside I was seething. They weren't doing this for me, they were doing it for themselves. My son, Mark, chimed in from the doorway, arms crossed, trying to play the hero. "We've been talking, Mom. It's just too much for you to handle alone. And let's be real, you don't have the money to keep up with everything." His words hit like a slap. They weren't even asking, they were deciding. Like I was some senile old woman who couldn't possibly understand her own life anymore. What they didn't know was that I'd been balancing finances longer than they'd been alive, and I had more sitting in my secret account than both of them combined. Still, I stayed quiet, letting them talk, watching their rehearsed little act of concern. Lisa sighed, patting my hand like I was a child. "We've even found a buyer interested in your house," she added casually, as if slipping a knife between my ribs. That was when I realized just how far they were willing to go. They didn't just want me in a home, they wanted my house sold, my independence stripped, and whatever scraps of money they thought I had left under their control. For a moment, I felt crushed, like the years I'd spent raising them meant nothing. But then, a colder, sharper feeling took over. Betrayal has a way of burning off sadness and leaving only resolve. They thought they could outmaneuver me, shuffle me into a corner, and start divvying up my life like I was already gone. That's when I knew the time for secrecy was almost over. I would let them think they'd won, let them circle like vultures, and then when they were sure I was helpless, I'd show them the truth. Asterisk, I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lisa's smug smile and heard Mark's dismissive tone, like they were already measuring drapes for their new life without me in the picture. But instead of crying, I lay there thinking, running through scenarios in my head. By sunrise, I had a plan, not just a vague idea, but a step-by-step playbook that would make them regret underestimating me. The first step was simple: act exactly the way they expected. I let my shoulders slump a little more, let my voice carry that quiver of exhaustion, and even faked a little confusion when they asked me about bills. They wanted me to look weak. Fine. I'd give them weakness on a silver platter. While they thought they were leading me, toward their goal. I was leading them into mine. A few days later, when Lisa stopped by again, I asked her ever so sweetly if she could help me sort out some paperwork. Her eyes lit up. She thought the trap was closing on me. She didn't know I had already transferred a portion of my savings from the secret account into another bank under a trust with only my name on it. Quietly, efficiently, I was locking down my assets where their greedy little hands couldn't reach. I also contacted my old lawyer friend, Mr. Harlan, a man who owed me a favor from years back. I invited him over under the guise of having tea, but really, we were drawing up legal papers to protect everything I owned. Meanwhile, I let Mark babble on about how much the house would sell for, nodding and smiling like an oblivious grandmother who didn't understand real estate. Inside, I was documenting every word, every push they made, because when the time came, their own words would bury them. I even played along when Lisa suggested we tour a retirement home. I wore my best dress, clutched my purse like a nervous old lady, and let her lead me through the sterile hallways. She thought I was broken. What she didn't notice was the tiny recorder in my pocket, capturing every condescending thing she whispered under her breath. By the end of that week, my plan was in motion, my finances shielded, my lawyer prepared, and a growing pile of evidence showing just how ruthlessly they wanted to strip me of everything. They thought I was fading, but really, I was sharpening my claws, and soon enough, they were going to feel them. The hardest part of any revenge isn't the planning, it's the waiting. I had to let them believe they were steering the ship, even though I was the one charting the waters. Lisa called me one evening, her tone dripping with false warmth, saying, "Mom, we're going to meet with the realtor next week, just to talk, no pressure." I acted hesitant, even nervous, asking timid questions like, "Do you really think someone would want my little house?" She reassured me like I was a child, saying the market was strong and the buyer was eager. I nearly laughed into the phone, because what she didn't realize was that I already knew the buyer. My lawyer had quietly reached out, and I'd discovered the eager buyer was a friend of Mark's who intended to flip the house for a massive profit. They weren't just trying to help me, they were running a scheme. That discovery only fueled me more. The next step was to make sure every move they made left a trail. I started keeping a written journal, recording dates, conversations, even the little manipulations they tried to slip into casual talk. If Lisa suggested, "You'd be so much safer with nurses around," I wrote it down. If Mark muttered, "This place is too big for you to keep up with," I logged it word for word. Evidence piles up slowly, but steadily, and I knew one day, every detail would matter. Meanwhile, I set up a meeting with Mr. Harlan and finalized my living trust. The secret bank account, which by then held more than $500,000 from decades of careful saving and investments, was legally untouchable, shielded from any family claim. If they thought selling the house would give them access to my money, they were in for the shock of their lives. To sweeten the trap, I even wrote a draft consent form for the house sale, leaving it out on the kitchen counter where Lisa could spot it. She picked it up, eyes wide, and said, "Oh, Mom, you're finally coming around." I gave her my best shaky smile and replied, "I just want to do what's best for everyone." Inside, I was laughing so hard it almost hurt, because that piece of paper wasn't legally binding, it was bait. Every step, every smile, every trembling hand I showed them was a performance, and they were buying tickets to the best show of their lives. Soon, the curtain would rise, and they'd see the real me, not the frail old woman they thought they could shove aside, but the woman who had outsmarted them from the very beginning. The day of the so-called big meeting came faster than I expected. Lisa and Mark showed up at my house all dressed up, Mark in a pressed shirt he hadn't worn since his last job interview, Lisa in a blazer that made her look more like a pushy saleswoman than a daughter. They were buzzing with excitement, whispering to each other like kids on Christmas morning. They thought they were about to pull the rug out from under me. I let them lead me into the living room where the realtor, a slick-haired man with a fake smile, was waiting. He spread out papers on my coffee table, speaking in a slow, patient voice like he was addressing a senile old lady. "Mrs. Walker, this is just a preliminary agreement. Nothing binding yet," he said, sliding the pen toward me. Lisa chimed in, "See, Mom, just a signature, and we're on our way to making sure you're safe and comfortable." My hand shook as I reached for the pen, not from fear but from the effort of keeping up the act. I pretended to struggle with the pages, asked questions that made me sound confused, and let them reassure me over and over. Every second of their patronizing words was recorded on the device tucked inside my sweater pocket. But here's the thing, I didn't sign a single line. Instead, I made a show of getting tired and setting the pen down, saying I needed a night to think. Lisa frowned, clearly frustrated, but quickly covered it with another sugary smile. Of course, Mom, take your time. We just want what's best. They thought they were being patient, but I could see the desperation in their eyes. They were already counting the money, already imagining life without me standing in their way. And that's when I knew it was time to spring the first part of my trap. That evening, I invited them back under the pretense of going over the papers again. When they arrived, I had tea waiting. The same tea I used to make when they were kids. They thought it was a peace offering, but the truth was, I wanted them relaxed, unguarded, sipping chamomile while I slowly unraveled their little scheme. As they sipped, I mentioned casually that I had spoken to my bank about transferring some funds to cover the move. Lisa nearly dropped her cup. Funds? What funds? She asked, her eyes narrowing. I just smiled sweetly and said, oh, nothing much, just some savings I've kept aside all these years. I watched the color drain from their faces as the wheels in their heads turned. They thought they were stealing from a broke old woman. Instead, they were about to realize I was the one holding the cards, and I couldn't wait to play my hand. Lisa leaned forward, her teacup clinking as she set it down, her polite mask slipping for the first time. Savings, she repeated, her voice sharper now. Mark's eyebrows shot up, and I could practically see the gears grinding in his greedy little brain. I kept my tone airy, like it was no big deal. Oh yes, dear. I've been putting money away since before either of you were born. Your father and I never believed in spending everything we'd earned. We always saved. Compound interest is a magical thing, you know. Their eyes widened, and that was the exact moment I knew I had them hooked. They thought they'd been circling a helpless bird, but the bird had just spread her wings. Lisa tried to recover, forcing a laugh. Well, Mom, that's great. That'll really help cover your expenses at the retirement community. She said it with a practiced calm, but I could hear the strain. Mark wasn't so subtle. He leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. How much are we talking about? I tilted my head, pretending to think, while inside I was savoring every second. Oh, enough to keep me comfortable. A little over $500,000, last I checked. The silence that followed was delicious. Mark's mouth actually dropped open, and Lisa's eyes darted toward the realtor's folder still sitting on my coffee table. They hadn't expected this. They thought they were scraping the last crumbs from my life, only to realize they'd been sitting next to a banquet. I let the silence stretch, watching them squirm, before I added, and before you ask, no, you can't touch a dime. It's in a trust. My trust. Ironclad. Their faces soured, all pretense gone. Lisa snapped, Mom, why didn't you tell us about this? We could have helped you manage it. Her voice cracked at the word helped. I gave her the kind of smile only a mother can give, warm on the surface, sharp underneath. Because I knew if I told you, you'd do exactly what you're trying to do right now. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. They had no idea I was still just peeling back the first layer of my plan. Soon, they'd realize I hadn't just protected my money, I'd been building a case against them, and their greed was writing the final chapters for me. Mark was the first to break the silence. His face flushed red, his voice low and sharp. You've been hiding money from us. The audacity almost made me laugh out loud. From them, as if I owed them every detail of my life's savings, as if they were entitled to it. I leaned back in my chair, my hands folded neatly in my lap. Not hiding, I said calmly. Protecting. There's a difference. Lisa leaned forward, her hands flat on the table, her mask of fake kindness long gone. This is ridiculous, Mom. You're not thinking clearly. You need us to help manage things before you do something foolish. That was my cue. I reached into the side drawer of my coffee table and pulled out a small stack of papers, sliding them across with a slow, deliberate motion. Funny you should say that, I told them. Because I've been very clear with my lawyer. Their faces paled as they read the bold letters on top of the document. Living trust agreement. Their eyes darted across the paragraphs, realizing everything, my bank accounts, my assets, even the house, was locked tight in a legal structure that cut them completely out. Mark's voice wavered as he read aloud. Sole beneficiary. Charitable foundation. His eyes flicked up, full of disbelief. I smiled, savoring the moment. Yes, if anything happens to me, the money doesn't go to either of you. It goes to the charity your father and I supported for years, the house too, if I choose. Their jaws clenched, panic flashing across their faces. And then, for the finishing touch, I pulled out the small recorder I'd hidden in my pocket the week before. With one click, the room filled with their own voices, condescending, manipulative, talking about how much the house would sell for, how much easier life would be once I was tucked away in a nursing home. Lisa's hand shot out. Turn that off. I didn't flinch. No, darling, this is going to stay on. Because if you try to push me again, this recording goes straight to my lawyer. And believe me, he knows exactly what to do with it. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I'd heard in years. For the first time, they weren't in control. For the first time, they looked at me not as a frail old woman, but as the one person who had outsmarted them at every step. And I wasn't done yet. Lisa was the first to crack, her voice high-pitched and trembling. Mom, we didn't mean it like that. We were just worried about you. Her hands fluttered nervously, her eyes darting to the recorder still sitting on the table. Mark tried a different approach, leaning forward with a forced grin, his tone suddenly syrupy. Yeah, Mom, we just wanted to make sure you were comfortable. We love you, you know that. I almost laughed in his face. The shift from greed to fake affection was so fast it was almost comical. But I didn't let my expression change. I let the silence stretch, let them sweat under the weight of their own guilt. Finally, I spoke, my voice steady, calm, and sharper than any knife. No, you wanted the house. You wanted control. You wanted me out of the way. Don't pretend it was anything else. Lisa's eyes welled up, whether from genuine shame or just frustration at being caught. I couldn't tell it. Honestly, I didn't care. Mom, please, we're family, she whispered. Exactly, I replied. And family doesn't scheme to sell each other's homes behind their backs. The color drained from her face. Mark slammed his hand on the table, frustration boiling over. So what now? You're just going to cut us out. Leave us with nothing. His words revealed the truth. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about their payday slipping away. I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. You'll get what you deserve. Nothing more, nothing less. The silence after that was heavy, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. They realized, finally, that the game was over. They weren't the puppet masters. I was. They tried backtracking, offering to forget the whole thing, offering to help around the house more, but their words were empty. I could see it in their eyes. The greed wasn't gone, just cornered. And cornered animals are dangerous. That's why I had to make sure the walls I built around my life were strong, unshakable, impossible for them to climb. I wasn't just protecting my money anymore. I was protecting my peace, my dignity, my freedom. And I wasn't going to let them take another step closer to it. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. Lisa and Mark stopped calling every day. Their constant check-ins vanished as quickly as they had appeared. I wasn't surprised without the promise of a quick fortune. Their motivation evaporated. But I didn't sit idle. I finalized my will, making sure everything was airtight. The house, donated to a veterans organization. My secret bank account, split between my church, a local women's shelter, and a scholarship fund for underprivileged kids. Every penny accounted for, every detail locked up in a way no greedy hand could touch. The lawyer helped me file everything with the court, official and binding. There would be no loopholes for Lisa or Mark to exploit. I didn't even tell them until the ink was dry, the documents sealed. When I finally sat them down one last time, I laid the truth out flat on the table, just like I had with the recorder. You thought I was helpless, I told them. You thought you could plan my future without me, but you forgot I've lived longer, fought harder, and learned more than you can imagine. Their faces fell as I handed them copies of the documents. Lisa's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages, her lips moving silently as she read. Mark's jaw tightened, his knuckles white as he gripped the paper. They realized in that moment that the fortune they thought was theirs had vanished into causes that would outlive them, outshine them, and remind them every single day that greed cost them everything. I stood up, slow but steady, my cane tapping against the hardwood floor. I hope one day you'll learn what family really means. Until then, don't expect anything more from me. I walked out of that room lighter than I had in years, my chest full of pride instead of pain. For once, I wasn't carrying the weight of their expectations or their schemes. I was free. Word spread quickly in the community. Neighbors, friends, even people I barely knew stopped me at the grocery store to tell me how proud they were, how inspiring it was to see an old woman stand up for herself, and maybe that was the sweetest revenge of all, not just outsmarting my children, but showing the world that age doesn't mean weakness, that dignity doesn't have an expiration date. I didn't just protect my house, my money, or my peace. I protected my legacy. And when the day finally comes that I'm no longer here, people will remember me not as a victim of greedy children, but as the grandmother who fought back and won,